Hey everyone, welcome back to This Week at Work, the show where we bring you the latest trending news on organizations, technology, and the future of work. I'm Chris Rainey. As always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Matt Burns. How you doing, Matt?
I'm home.
You're home. You finally made it. You're not on the move anymore.
Freshly painted wall as well.
Yeah, I don't see you as the painting type, if I'm being honest. Who did you get to do that?
My partner, who also helped pick the colors because I'm colorblind, and this kind of looks brown, but I'm told it's green, so I'm going with it.
I honestly wouldn't have noticed, but that's where we get in trouble, right? We're like, they put so much effort and thought into it, and us guys are like, oh, okay, cool. You painted it, amazing. So you're how many hours? How long did it take you to get to where you are right now? Like literally a week.
Yeah, it was a 9-day drive.
9-day drive.
Yeah, it's like going to Istanbul and back. So just made it.
Why not get the plane? But you just sightseed along the way.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to see some great places all through the Canadian frontier if I hadn't done the drive. So,
what was your favorite spot that you saw on the way?
Oof, good question. The Rocky Mountains are always really impressive. Did a really nice hike first thing in the morning. I did not dress appropriately. It was freezing. And then it warmed up and we were off the trail by about 10 a.m., but beautiful, beautiful vistas.
Nice. I feel like I'd just get lost. Someone who grows up in London, I don't think we're ready for those type of environments.
No.
You got the beard for it, though.
So. I fit in. They don't know that the beard's a sham. They don't know that.
Yeah. They have no idea at all.
No idea.
Oh, cool. Hey, everyone. So what we're talking about today. So today we're talking about productivity paranoia, which has been doing the rounds in the news, on LinkedIn, a lot of research out about it. In fact, actually, our partners this week, Microsoft, something they're talking about, according to their latest research of 20,000 global knowledge workers, 85% of leaders say that the shift to hybrid work has made it hard to be confident that employees are being productive, whilst 87% of workers report they're actually performing just fine. So only 12% of employers say that they have full confidence in their team and that they're being productive, which is pretty shocking, Matt. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think it's shocking at all.
You don't? Okay.
No.
It should be shocking, but we're not surprised.
Not surprised. I understand this. I mean, I think we need to accept the fact that work looks differently depending on the role that you inhabit. So as an individual contributor, most individual contributors would say that they prefer to work from home because it's less interruptions. Now, again, caveats, Chris, they have the right working space. They're not working on top of each other. But with the right working space, working from home allows for greater detailed, deep learning, detailed, deep focus on tasks. And the office has become the place to socialize, to interact. So this hybrid, methodology would imply that people want to come back to the office to interact with their coworkers. Leaders, on the other hand, most of their work involves supervision, interacting with people. And I don't know about you, Chris, but when I was a leader, there was definitely this strong bias towards being visible. It's really hard to be visible when you're sitting at home in front of your computer. So leaders see work and productivity differently than workers do. But it goes back to our earlier conversations about inputs versus outputs. So I think it's more a function of how do leaders and organizations need to transfer the way they think about work into this new world. It's less about presenteeism and more about actual outputs.
Yeah. It's going to get difficult, right? Because we've seen, sorry, my voice is gone. It's gone, Matt. That's it.
I'm doing it. I got it for you. Don't worry.
It's going to get more and more difficult, right? With all of the research we're seeing is that employees want more hybrid work, more flexible working. So we're going to have to shift. And I think this is obviously where technology comes in to help us as well. But overall, how have you seen, both the CHROs that you speak to every day during your work, overall, how have you seen companies adapting in terms of the job they're doing?
Well, you say technology will help us. So it's actually hurting us because it's also led to the proliferation of monitoring tools. We talked about your partner last week and how she's having to do a keystroke while she's feeding the baby. Like it cuts both ways. So I'm seeing organizations, depending on the industry, depending on the location, depending on the leadership diversity, they approach it differently. So it's a mixed bag. Chris, I was talking to 2 HR leaders this morning before our call, and they have 2 very different experiences. One is a tech startup. So for them, hybrid work was essentially no big deal. They were doing
Yeah.
more or less that anyway. Now they've created more structure. And now where I live in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, but also a city in Ontario, we actually introduced legislation October the 11th that required employers to have a work from home / electronic monitoring program in place for any companies over 25 employees. So they actually have to state what is their monitoring policy, what do they do to monitor employees so that
Really?
people have full visibility to it. Now, it's the first of its kind in Canada, but I expect we'll see more and more of that across this country and potentially into other countries as employees try to figure out what does oversight look like in this new world. That's the explicit monitoring, Chris. I also worry about the more implicit monitoring. So there's, opportunities with the other tools, whether that be Teams or Hangouts, where you can see who was online and most active and present. Being present and being available looks different in this new world. I think the biggest challenge, though, for HR leaders is helping organizations and the leaders themselves transition to a new way of thinking and give them confidence and comfort of that. Just because you can't see your people next to you in a cubicle doesn't mean that they're not being productive, doesn't mean that they're not delivering on their outputs and their expectations. And it does require you to be more intentional with expectation setting, goal setting, quality expectations, and then follow up and intentionality around feedback. When you have those things in place, this insecurity, this lack of trust around people being in the office tends to go away. But I respect the fact that for many leaders, this is a big shift in how they operated.
Yeah, like, it's really going to be about reframing how they assess productivity, right? But as you said, for so many of us, we've been doing it one way for so long, and you have to be seen to be productive, for example. I always had this conversation with Shane in the past, my co-founder. I used to say, Shane, it's about how many hours you're here. It's about the output of the work. Because we used to talk about, some of our employees would be here for a few hours and do all of their job, and it takes them 8 hours and they've just done it. For me, it wasn't really about the time in, but that took quite a long time, to be honest, to get to that frame of thinking as well. And even when we went remote for the first time, I found myself a little bit lost for the first few months trying to figure out, is work being done? We use monday.com, for example, in our organization in terms of tracking productivity, and it works great for everyone. As well, but it's going to be more of a cultural shift that we're going to have to go through, and we need to help support our leaders. They've already got enough to deal with as well, and now this is something else added on.
Well, this is a lack of change management during the pandemic rearing its ugly head. I haven't talked to an organization that did a really satisfactory job, according to their own HR leaders, with change management in the early days of the pandemic. We didn't see this coming in a lot of cases. We were not prepared for it in a lot of organizations, and operational and business continuity took precedent. Do we have laptops? Do we have VPNs? Do people have access to the things that they need to work from home? But the actual change, how leaders work with staff, how staff work with each other, how people interact in environments where you may actually never physically meet your coworkers. We didn't go through a thinking around that. We're doing it now, but it is illuminating some gaps in our thinking and some things we need to address going forward if we're going to do this effectively. Because, Chris, I think the train has left the station. We are now working in a hybrid work environment. The question is, how hybrid are you willing to be?
Yeah. How can HR leaders get ahead of this? Because it feels like we're always playing catch up.
Well, it's challenging because oftentimes HR leaders are the buffer between their organization's employee base and the leadership of the organization. They see employee surveys, they see sentiment analysis, they're interacting with people in open door settings. So they're seeing what's happening in real time. They're coaching leaders. And at the same time, they're having to influence a leadership team that may or may not be aligned with this new way of thinking. Now, it's clearly much more easy when you have a leadership team that's bought in to greater flexibility, greater employee autonomy. More challenging in environments where you don't have that same buy-in. So I think to get ahead of it, it's first understanding who are your key stakeholders that are in this environment and what do they understand and what do they need to be more comfortable with this new hybrid way of working. And where they have any objections or concerns, how do we illuminate those and how do we solve for them in a way that makes them feel confident in their leadership and in their ability for their employees to deliver output. And then I think last, if not least, Chris, is ongoing monitoring through pulse surveys, through open doors, town hall meetings, checking in with your employees. What do they need? What do they want? This isn't one size fits all. And I've talked to a number of employees who actually like going back to the office for the social connection, and choose to go back more often than they have to because they like that, it isn't a one size fits all approach. Today, it's about providing and affording flexibility.
Mm-hmm. On that point, I saw also in the same Microsoft research, they said the number one reason that people want to return to the office is to see each other. No surprise there. So for people do want to come back, but it has to be intentional. It can't just be coming back for the sake of coming back, which is what unfortunately many companies, it's like, come back one day a week. Oh, now it's 2, now it's 3, but there's no intention of why they're coming back to collaborate, ideate, create, to build the bond between the team as well. And hopefully that will reduce some of that paranoia, having those moments when you're together and building that trust. It's quite difficult to do that, especially if you're new to the organization and you've only ever had that remote experience. It's even more challenging as well.
I think the word intentionality is a really key word. That's the fundamental shift for most organizations and leaders, is being intentional with task delegation, with task follow-up, with communication, with cultural and team building. It's all possible. All these things happen, Chris, organically in organizations, but many times they happen as a happenstance of what was occurring in the day-to-day function. You pop by somebody's desk, hey, how's it going? You see somebody, maybe sighing or more distracted during a team meeting, you check in on them. You don't have the same privilege of being able to have those visible cues. So how do you introduce more intentionality into your management practices so that you can still engage with your team members, but again, afford them greater flexibility? At the end of the day, Chris, I just want to point out demographics. Demographics are changing, and the total available workforce is shrinking, at least in North America and Western Europe. As baby boomers retire, there are less millennials in Gen Z and Gen X to backfill those resources. And what we're seeing is that with baby boomers leaving the organization, they're taking with them institutional knowledge, leadership skills, as well as a significant cultural torchbearer role that they played. As they leave and they're backfilled by other members of the team, we have to acknowledge that the war for talent is only going to get more difficult for organizations going forward. This is the time to introduce flexibility. Otherwise, you will be at a disadvantage when you look at your competitors who will offer greater flexibility and will likely put themselves first in line for that key talent.
Yeah, I was going to ask you then, what do you think the consequence will be for those companies that don't make this change?
Yeah, I think it's just that. I think they're going to have a harder time attracting and retaining key talent. I think they're going to have a harder time encouraging people to be productive. When you look over your shoulder and you see your friends and your colleagues and your other people in your network having greater flexibility and you don't, I think you're going to see people vote with their feet. And at least in where I'm living in North America, there certainly is definitely a candidate market, and we have an opportunity to really address that at an organizational level. I think if you don't take that approach, you're speaking to a very small subset of a very large employee population base. And that may be what you're looking for. And Chris, let's be honest, there are some organizations that have that compression. If you're in an operational environment like retail, if you're in certain industries where you have to be physically present, it's a different conversation. But for knowledge-based workers, which is what the Microsoft study mostly dealt with, those 20,000 plus employees were knowledge-based workers. The fact is the majority of their work does not need to be done in a physical office space, but can be done asynchronously and can be done anywhere in the world.
I think Bruno has a question. Did you just pop in, Bruno?
Yeah, we have an interesting point from Diana Piper, who notes that there's a trend of employees feeling micromanaged because the questions to understand progress, sort of everyday progress, is done with intentional engagement rather than a walk by chat in the office. Asking questions throughout the day casually comes across differently in real life than in a virtual environment. It needs to be discussed, but both sides need to come together to resolve. This isn't just a leader problem to resolve.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's really, really wise feedback too. I think this is a shared responsibility, like any relationship is. And I think what we're saying, Chris, is that in most cases, employees are being very clear with what they want. They want more flexibility. So now it's incumbent upon organizations and leaders to try and meet them where they're at. And at the same time, we can't see any type of regression when it comes to productivity, or regression when it comes to outputs, or regression when it comes to employee engagement. We need to see all those things in place. The fastest way to achieve that is through collaborative methods.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking while you're saying all of that a lot of this links back to last week's conversation around power skills. The role of a leader has really moved from sort of the command and control to focusing on leading with empathy, to focus on the collaboration, to focus on all of those other power skills we discussed last week, which is really going to make the difference. Because when it comes to productivity paranoia, it's because of those outdated leadership models. Does that make sense?
It does. And also, let's be fair. You and I were both leaders in our past lives. You are still, I am still in our new lives. There's pressure on leaders to deliver as well. Everyone reports to somebody else in some way, shape, or form. And leaders, especially middle managers, are under a lot of pressure from senior leadership to deliver on objectives. And they're working through their teams to actually achieve those objectives. So I appreciate that there could be some sensitivity around micromanagement. And that generally stems from a lack of confidence in your teams to be able to deliver. The fastest way, again, to achieve that is by having a conversation, establishing those clear guidelines and expectations, and then following up with your employees along the way to see that they have the right tools, the right support, the right advice and guidance to be able to achieve their outcomes. And that's where performance management really takes into account.
Yeah. Well, great insights, Matt, and thank you for the question. Whoever that was, apologies, I forgot your name now. Whoever's question that was, amazing. Thank you very much. One of the things that we discussed last week, Matt, in the comments section, a few of you said it would be great to have part of the show where we could shout out some great vendors. It's kind of a bit of a minefield out there. Every day there's a new kind of company popping up trying to solve, or telling you they can solve all of your problems. So one of the things that me and Matt are going to do every week is just introduce some vendors to you all that we think are doing some great work. And just to be clear, this is not sponsored. These are not, partners that are paying us money. So there's, me and Matt are not getting anything out of this, but we want to introduce different companies to you all that we feel that will add value. And one of the companies me and Matt came across this week was a company called Dandy. That's D-A-N-D-I. They're a really amazing analytics platform that are advancing D&I efforts. So if that's something of an interest to you, there's a link in the chat and also in the description for you to check them out. So if you're looking to advance your D&I efforts faster and smarter before, I'll definitely suggest you connect with them and also connect with Jeff Fernandez, their CEO, who's also tagged in on LinkedIn. I think the D&I space is such an exciting space, and it's not just going to impact us personally, professionally, but for also society as well. And I think many companies struggle with the analytics space side of things. So Dandy are a new organization we came across literally this week. And a couple of the CHROs that I've spoken to have kind of mentioned great things. So just wanted to point that out. Also from next week, we're also going to be doing a new segment called HR Leaders on the Move. Just celebrating the successes of HR leaders in organizations and then moving into new roles as well. But we love your ideas. Everyone who keeps throwing the ideas at us, let us know. Anything else you want us to talk about during the episodes, please let us know. Matt, did you want to add anything?
No, just on the Dandy piece, I just want to call out what I love about that solution, Chris, is they've gone beyond simply quotas and tracking information. It's a smart level of insights that they're providing. It's the next level of DE and I and B that we're looking for in organizations. And I'm really excited to give some spotlight to some of our HR leaders who are making moves. I see it in my feed every day on LinkedIn. Yeah. There's people doing some amazing work out there. Looking forward to celebrating some of those all-stars.
Cool. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. As always, if you're not already following me and Matt on LinkedIn, do that. There's a new feature on LinkedIn where there's a little bell icon next to our names. So if you click that, you'll be notified when we go live. Apart from that, we wish you all the best. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone. Bye, Matt.
Bye, all.
Bye. actually genuinely exposing the audience to some new people as well.